Hi, thanks for having me here today. I'm Morgan Levy, and I'm a PhD student at UC Berkeley. I'll be discussing a study we're calling Land Use Change Impacts to Flows and Hydropower at the southern fringe of the Brazilian Amazon. The motivation behind this work is that model-based studies suggest land use change, such as agricultural-driven deforestation, can impact regional water cycles. However, there are limited database studies of these impacts, specifically at regional scales, and even fewer that connect those impacts to energy systems. The southern fringe of the Brazilian Amazon is a region we call the rainforest-savanna transition zone because it's characterized by the transition from Amazonian rainforest to tropical savanna, or mixed grassland and forest vegetation. In this region, and over the past several decades, there has been agricultural expansion and intensification, as well as hydropower development. What you're seeing is a pop-out of Mato Grosso State, which is a 900,000 square kilometer area used in our preliminary analysis. The image on the left shows forest cover in the year 2000 in light green, and the image on the right shows forest loss between the years of 2001 and 2012 in red. So what you can see is that land use change in the form of forest clearing has occurred extensively in this region, and most dramatically in areas of high forest cover density to the north into the Amazon. To connect this to hydrology, what many studies show is that land use change may alter river flows by altering plant water uptake or soil drainage properties immediately following a land use change and in the long term. So altered river flows stand to impact hydropower generation, which is important in a country where hydropower accounts for more than 80% of electricity generation and where expansion of small run-of-river hydropower is central to rural development. Therefore, our research focuses on the impacts of land use change to river flows and flow-dependent energy generation in the forest-savanna transition zone of Brazil. First, this is not a model-based study, but a data-based analysis. Second, we ask the question not of a particular river, but of a collection of rivers. Third, we ask if impacts are relevant to hydroelectric generation and therefore hydropower planning that may proceed simultaneous to continued land use change. What makes this study unique is the regional focus instead of individual catchment scale, combined with the empirical approach and the connection to energy production. For the rest of this talk, I'll discuss some background on land use change and data, our study design, some preliminary results, and then ongoing work. I also want to quickly note that there's a long history of research on vegetation change impacts to water cycles, and our study builds on that well-developed body of work. The first point I'd like to make is that land use change in the transition zone is not only deforestation. Land use types include dense forest, less dense savanna vegetation, pasture, and cropland. What you're seeing is a 250-meter resolution land cover classification in 2 years, 2001 and 2011, for one example river basin located in the transition zone state of Mato Grosso. This is a more detailed land use change set than the forest loss data I showed before. This study makes use of a novel spatial data set that combines an agricultural land use classification from collaborators at Brown and Tufts universities with forest change data from the University of Maryland and Google. Clearing of dense rainforest as well as less dense savanna may both occur. In this example river basin, the primary change occurring is a conversion of savanna, not rainforest, to pasture. Eventually, pasture may be transitioned to single and double cropped rotations of soy, corn, and cotton, which are produced for food, animal feed, and biofuel uses. This type of transition is what this image is showing over the same time period in a different example river basin. This example shows intensification of agriculture, largely from pasture, shown in light green, and soy, shown in yellow, to double crop soy and corn, shown in pink. These different land use types and transitions between them constitute a full picture of land use change in this region. Our study design conceptualizes land use types as different treatments that may impact flow and hydropower differently. This means we can categorize river basins by measures of land use change over time and establish relationships between land use measures, flow, and hydropower. We take into account variables that complicate the simple path, which may bias or confound results. These include rainfall, for which we use a combination of ground network and remotely sensed trim rainfall data, soil types from the Harmonized World Soil Database, and DEM. Land use can be measured in a number of different ways as the magnitude, proportion, or spatial clustering measure of land use types. For example, many studies focus on the fraction of total basin area transitioned from one land use type to another. We also observe time series of flow in gauged basins and can therefore estimate flow duration curves, which show the duration or probability on the y-axis of equaling or exceeding a given flow on the x-axis, or in other words, this is 1 minus the CDF of flow. Without going into too much detail, the flow duration curve is just a measure meant to demonstrate that flow time series data provides information on minimum and capacity flows for modeled hydropower at or near gauge locations. The main takeaway is that flow duration curves provide the key information necessary to assess hydropower impacts. In summary, we connect different land use types and their change to flow duration curves across many basins. To get a first-pass estimate of the relationship between land use change and flows, we performed a simple regression analysis. We obtained the estimate of a coefficient of interest on loss of forest and savanna combined by regressing a flow statistic, for example, mean monthly flow, on annual and cumulative forest and savanna loss, as well as rainfall, basin and month fixed effects, and a time trend. The preliminary regression included 72 gauged basins between 2001 and 2011. So with monthly data, this is just under 6,000 observations, and it showed a positive and statistically significant effect for cumulative forest and savanna loss, but not annual loss. This agrees with previous studies that find that flow change is observable and significant only past some threshold of change. The coefficient on cumulative loss being small illustrates a main point of inquiry in this analysis. How do flow changes stand to impact hydropower, and specifically small run-of-river hydropower? If land use change impacts rivers in the way previous studies do suggest, the problem is that flow may occur more or less frequently within the range for which plants are designed, resulting in suboptimal energy generation. What you're seeing in the figure on the right are flows in a single example river basin in black and modeled run-of-river hydropower potential in red. The x-axis is time over a single water year, the left y-axis is flow, and the right y-axis is modeled hydropower. Modeled hydropower is effectively a scaling of flow. Maximum energy generation is achieved at high flows, and generation stops at flows below a critical level. If our final analysis yielded similar results to these very preliminary findings, then we might say that even extreme natural vegetation loss would have a negligible impact on peak energy generation during wet periods, when a 1% flow change, for example, is a small percentage of flows, but possibly a small positive impact during low flows, when a small flow change could result in energy generation at times when it would have not otherwise occurred. This does not consider different seasonal impacts and the timing of flow increases, which determine true impacts to hydropower, and we are addressing this in ongoing work. In summary, this analysis helped us get a sense of the relationship between variables without overinterpreting results. Our ongoing work focuses on refining our analysis using a mixed methods approach. We are adopting two additional empirical approaches. The first is a paired basin approach that estimates treatment effects, or the effects of different land use types on flow. The second is a Bedico curve-based approach. A Bedico curve is pictured on the bottom, and it describes the relationship between evapotranspiration and potential evapotranspiration as a fraction of rainfall, and can be used to estimate water yield change between basins with different vegetation types. A paired basin analysis traditionally considers only a few basins that are the subject of experiments. The method boils down to regressing flows from basins undergoing treatment, such as forest clearing, on flows from control basins over 2 time periods, a calibration and a treatment period. Statistics on the fitted model coefficients and predictions enable the estimation of treatment effects. Because our study uses basins for which land use change is not the result of a formal experiment, it is an observational study, and because we consider a relatively large number of basins, we are modifying this traditional approach to suit our study. One method used widely in other fields is a difference in differences approach, wherein flow from both treated and control basins are regressed on indicators for treatment status, time period, and their interaction, with attention paid to matching treatment and control basins so as to reduce bias due to confounding variables like rainfall or elevation. An important thing to point out is that due to data limitations, these analyses may only represent impacts at short to medium timescales. It is estimated to take on average 15 years following an impulse land use change for a basin to reach a new equilibrium flow state. A benefit of this approach is that effects directly relate to flow duration curves and hydropower. To get at the long-term equilibrium estimates of flow impacts, we can use a Bodico curve approach to estimate limiting hydroclimatic curves for basins undergoing change. A benefit of this approach is that it uses rainfall and evapotranspiration data and does not require flow data. Spatial data sets for rainfall and evapotranspiration from TRIM and MODIS allow us to analyze a large number of basins in the study region, both gauged and ungauged. However, results will only be indirectly related to hydropower due to the seasonal or annual timescale of a Bodico analysis and the estimated nature of water yield change. With this mixed method approach, we anticipate being able to provide an empirical regional assessment of land use change impacts to flows and hydropower that may inform and validate previous and ongoing model-based studies in this region and worldwide. Our focus is Brazil, but findings are relevant to emerging economies worldwide where agriculture and hydroelectric generation are spatially coupled. These include other Central and South American countries, tropical Africa, and Southeast Asia. That concludes my talk, so I'd like to thank all of you here today, and I'd also like to acknowledge my co-authors and collaborators and the institutions that have supported this work. Thank you.
Do we have questions?
All good.
Thank you very much.
Another major concern for hydropower, for hydropower associated with land use change is related to erosion vectors and the sediment load in the river reach. Are you considering that at all, the effect of the increased sedimentation on technologies that might be used for hydropower?
I would love to consider that. So at the regional scale, where we're doing a multi-basin approach, the data from the National Brazilian Water Agency, they do actually have some water quality data that involves sediment, so turbidity. These are measured at such a coarse resolution that it's not possible to actually do the analysis at the regional larger data scale that we're doing it at. So yeah, it would be interesting to do that in individual basins where you could get quality, water quality data, but at this level with these data, it's really not possible.
Are you also considering the effects of the feedbacks by changing forest patches? I know you focused at first on scanning and cultivated agriculture. On precipitation, local precipitation?
Right, so yeah, one of the complicating factors of studying land use change impacts to hydrology is that there is a feedback. So reduced evapotranspiration from plants can, in this region, because it has convective rainfall, translate to reduced precipitation at the longer term scale. So the issue, the way that we're approaching this is that kind of the empirical strategy that we have is meant to account for rainfall in the statistics such that you are controlling for climate. The study of whether or not these land use changes impact precipitation in the long term in such a way that they modify flows that's meaningful for hydropower, it does end up sort of being a separate question, but it is a really interesting one. It is one we're thinking about.